Well, what we do at Konica Minolta is we look first at the pre-sale. So immediately when we engage the client before the installation of a color press like the C1100 or the 1085 or even a 1070 you see behind me, we want to determine what the client's color standards or quality standards are. So it's very simple questions like, do you have a proofing system? What are you proofing to? Is it grackle, swap, fogra? So we want to get those answers prior to the implementation installation of the press, because we want to install the press to the quality standards that are acceptable to the client. So it's almost like a press commissioning. So at the point of install, not only our service personnel are in line with the customer's quality expectations, they also speak the same language as a commercial printer. They know what grackle is, they know what G7 is, but they also have the tools to be able to sustain that after the sale, after the installation, and throughout the lifespan of the device. So for instance, our service engineers will baseline the machine first to make sure it's printing correctly to the densities and the quality, the resolution that's expected, that we know it should be printing to. Then our implementation team, the majority of which are G7 experts, will apply the G7 process to the press and verify that it is hitting those quality standards. So there's an objective assessment after the installation that the device is ready to go into production, that it meets the quality needs the client told us prior to the sale. The implementation process started with a phone call. We essentially set up a conference call with the general manager, Ken, George, the owner, the press operator for the Komori, the offset side, and the digital. We had them all on a conference call, and we explained to them what the process would be. We also took the opportunity to ask questions. What are your pain points in quality management? Took copious notes. So we put a lot of emphasis before we come out on site and planning and prepping the client before we actually do the implementation. We start the calibration processes. So for instance, at Spectrum, we have a C1100 Konica Minolta digital press, a C1085 Konica Minolta, C1070, an Indigo 5500, an Epson Sure Color proofing system, and then of course a 6-color offset 628 Komori. So that's a lot of equipment. So we want to set the right expectation, especially for time. We have to work around the customer's production schedule. They can't bring their plant down for 3 days for the G7 expert to come in to get them dialed in. So we have to work extra hours. We made that obvious in the initial call, so there's no, they're not getting blindsided during the implementation. So we actually did 2 calls. So there were some questions that needed to be answered. They had, Spectrum had some follow-up questions for us. We provided them with a lot of documentation, especially for the offset part of the implementation. So things like a checklist to ensure that your rollers are correct, stripes are correct, pH, conductivity, et cetera, ensuring that the device is printing to the manufacturer's spec as close as possible. Did the same thing on the digital side. Make sure that the Indigo has a full maintenance cycle on it. Make sure the Konicas are not at the end of the duty cycle. We want to start from a 0 point that we can always get back to if things start to drift off, because they will drift off, whether it's offset or digital. We want to give them that base and that foundation to get back to when things go off the rails. They did all that. Again, more follow-up phone calls, and eventually I did arrive out on site. First thing we tackled was the digital. It took us essentially a full day to calibrate the C1100 Konica Minolta digital press, the 1085, and then the Indigo. So that was 3 presses digital in 1 day. That's simply ensuring calibration is correct, looking at quality as far as, are there any imaging defects? Is there any streaking or banding or toner flaking? Any problems with the engine, we're going to inspect that engine thoroughly before we start the process. You have a question? No? Good? Okay. So that was the start, all right? Warm the presses up, made sure that the engine was linearized. There's a linearization process on each one of the digital devices that I just mentioned. After linearization, then we did the DFE calibration process and then a profile. We made an ICC profile using the tools at hand. There's a lot of solutions that can do profiling, do calibration, collect data, trending and analysis, but walking in, we understood what the tools were at hand. So for instance, on the digital side, we have EFI Fiery Color Profiler Suite. The version of Color Profiler Suite has G7 calibration and verification built into the solution. So this is a very simple tool to use to dial in a digital press with a fiery front end. Very easy wizard. So the change management or the training or the onboarding, whatever you want to call it, down the line will be very simple for them to implement. They don't have to be a G7 expert in order to do the process and follow a standard step routine of this is what I do first, second, third, fourth, fifth, okay? And that's essentially what we applied here. At the end of the process, we verify each one of the machines passed G7 master submission criteria for color space, which is the tighter of the tolerances for G7 master submission. The next day, we tackled the offset side. So what did offset involve? A full inspection, just like the digital. Are we slurring? Are we doubling? Do we have too much dot gain? Are we running excessive ink? So we worked hand in hand with the press operator. We essentially ran a linear test form, like the ones that are hanging on the wall over here. Linear meaning that I'm outputting plates that are verified that the plate tone values are what they say they are. So 50% should measure 50%, 25 should be 25, 75, etc. throughout the tonal range for each one of the plates. Loaded the plates on press, came up the color, and then we started to look at the solid densities and solid lab values. So we're trying to push the solids, cyan, magenta, and yellow, and black, to get them as close to the Grackle specifications for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Essentially, they're ISO 12647-2, if you want to look that up. It'll tell you what those LAB values are. We made sure that his instrumentation on press had those values loaded so he can easily measure his color bars to determine whether or not he needs to move ink up or down in density to achieve those LAB values. Again, density doesn't tell you what color it is, only LAB does. So we're using a combination of both of those metrics to determine the press okay. Once we achieve the values that were acceptable to the press operator, as well as getting as close as we could to the Grackle LAB values for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and red, green, and blue overprints, then we essentially cut out our calibration targets that we had on the test form, read them in with a tool called Curve 3. That's a Chromix product that'll essentially read a target in and tell you what your correction curves for the plates that need to be in order to achieve G7 gray balance. If we remember, G7's all about a standardized neutral gray target that we're trying to achieve on all these devices in order to achieve a similar visual appearance at the end of the day. So I have all of my equipment printing to the same bullseye, and essentially that's what we did here at Spectrum. So going back to the offset, once we implemented the correction curves that Curve 3 told us to apply to the plate setter to bring it into G7 compliance, we applied them to the rip, output a new set of plates, mounted them on press, came back to the same densities. Now we have the right densities that are giving us the right LAB response, okay? So it's very simple. Now he has his process control point for his coded sheet, for his densities, and his LAB values. He simply came back up to those values, evened it out across the printing unit from gear to operator side or operator to gear side, and lo and behold, we passed G7 and we were able to qualify the Komori. So it took essentially 3 days of some presentations. We do actually have to open up a PowerPoint now and again to explain to the staff what G7 is, what G7 means, which is gray balance, and then of course the 7 colors of ISO 12647-2. Cyan, magenta, yellow, black, red, green, and blue. So we give them some training on the fundamentals as well as applying it hands-on out on the plant floor. Also involved in the process in those 3 days was post-observation and coaching. So now that we've implemented, let's run jobs. Let's calibrate. What will we do for our daily quality control routines? What software we're going to use? How are we going to use it? What do we need to apply upstream and pre-press when jobs come in? What do we apply, or how do we open up a photograph in Photoshop and ensure that it's being separated and we're not ruining the original intent of the client that's providing the image to us? So we address those things. So we work with the pre-press, we work with CSRs, and honestly in 3 days, that's just a start. So after the 3 days, after I've explained everything that I just mentioned, we'll continue to follow up, because Konica Minolta is heavily invested in lean manufacturing and continual improvement. We approach G7 implementation like we do continual improvement. So we'll continue to observe Spectrum. So post-implementation, what are some of the things that we're going to address at Spectrum long term? We need to just talk to the ink manufacturer. Currently, they're running a heavy pigment load with the current ink set that they're using, and those values for LABs for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black don't conform to the Grackle specification. Yes, there's a great similar visual appearance just by applying gray balance curves to the press, and is an acceptable proof to press match for Spectrum and Spectrum's clients. But we talked about how can we tighten that bullseye? How can we get those tolerances down? So now we need to address the supply chain. We need to talk to the press manufacturer. We need to talk to the consumable supplier. Are we using the right, can we improve the quality by changing fountain solution? What's the cost that would be incurred? Of course, that's a factor. So we're going to start looking at advantages and, again, trying to improve what they're currently doing on the offset side. Same thing applies to digital. All right, what tools can we bring to digital to, one, optimize quality and improve the value stream, turn jobs around quicker, less errors, etc. Do we, for instance, should we measure color bars or control strips, or create ICC profiles once a month after PM? Do we do it daily? Do we do it? We want to find that sweet spot that makes sense for Spectrum. The only way we can find it is a team effort between the manufacturer or the supplier vendor and the customer, and through observation. We need to continually observe and collect data to see that trend and see where the weaknesses are, and then pull that tighter, make them more efficient.